Hello everyone, this is your gritty expert Alan Nguyen, and in this video I will give you an overview of diabetes mellitus, how to characterize it, its different types, and the hormone insulin as a key player in diabetes. Now first off, in the upper right hand corner I've depicted insulin as a key and a receptor on the cell membrane as a keyhole. Now once insulin comes into contact with its receptor, this will allow passage of glucose into the cells through a channel called GLUT4. Insulin also allows amino acids and fatty acids from the bloodstream into the cell. But if you want more in-depth of the activity of insulin, please check out the description in this video below, in which I will talk about the secretions of the pancreas and metabolism. Now on to characterization. So diabetes is characterized by a state of hyperglycemia. Now the keynote is that it is not acute, but a chronic high blood glucose level. This means that the patient exhibits a high concentration of glucose in the bloodstream at all times. Now on to the types. Type 1 is exhibited by 5% of diabetes patients, and this is quite rare. There's insufficient insulin secretion. Now why is that? Well, beta cells, which secrete the insulin in the islets of Langerhans of the pancreas, are destroyed by killer T lymphocytes. This is better known as an autoimmune disease in which the T killer cells of the patient kill their own beta cells. Therefore, glucose is unable to enter the muscle or adipose tissue. And there is a need for insulin supplementation or injections. Now on to type 2 diabetes, which is exhibited by 95% of diabetes patients. There is a higher than normal level of insulin secretion and insulin levels through the bloodstream due to excess blood glucose. So this patient is able to secrete insulin. However, they develop insulin resistance. Now, how is this resistance caused? Well, if the person were to consume a high amount of carbohydrates and fats, the body will respond by secreting a higher normal level of insulin. And this constant secretion of insulin will be detected by the body because the body is very good at detecting abnormal levels of secretions and will counteract this. And to counteract this, the body will reduce the amount of receptors along the cell, which means less keyholes for insulin to act upon. Therefore, less GLUT4 channels come to the membrane to allow passage of glucose into the cells, which is stated by the third key point. So there is glucose entry, however, it is very limited, unlike in type 1 where there is no glucose entry. Now type 2 can be treated with pharmaceutical drugs, which I will talk about later in this video. Now I will go into a little more detail about type 1 diabetes. Now, as stated before, the beta cells are destroyed by killer T cells, and the onset of type 1 diabetes can occur at any stage in a person's life, maybe due to environmental factors or the cause of a virus telling the pancreas to target its own beta cells. Now, since glucose is unable to enter the cell, fat synthesis lags behind lipolysis. Now, this is because the cell needs energy, however, glucose is unable to enter the cell to synthesize extra fats or fat stores. Therefore, the cell must tap into its reserves and break down those fats, which may be converted into ketones and result in ketoacidosis, which I will go over in a moment. Now, there's also an increase in the concentration of glucagon. Now, as stated before, glucagon helps the release of energy and results in glycogenolysis in the liver, which is the breakdown of glycogen or energy stores. Now, in the bottom left-hand corner, I've drawn a cell low on energy reserves, its cellular membrane with embedded insulin receptors. And above that is the bloodstream. So in the upper half of the bloodstream is typically what you would see in a type 1 diabetes patient at resting without any injection of insulin. As you can see, there is glucose in the bloodstream. However, there is no insulin to interact with its receptor to allow glucose into the cell. However, In the bottom half, which you will see depicted by a syringe, is a supplement of insulin into the bloodstream. Therefore, insulin is able to enter the bloodstream and interact with its receptors to allow glucose into the cells. Now, how about consequences of type 1 diabetes? Well, the acute consequences or short-term consequences is excess urination. This would result in a higher concentration of glucose, which when filtered through the kidneys absorbs more water into the convoluted tubules, which will later be excreted as urine. This will also result in muscle wasting and weakness, as the body will have to break down amino acids or proteins to use as energy too. There's also metabolic acidosis. Now, before I stated a word called ketoacidosis. This is a breakdown of fats to very ketone bodies. This will increase the acidity of the blood, which is not good because it may lead to impaired brain function, coma, and death. Now, how about chronic or long-term effects? Well, there is the degeneration of blood vessels and nerves. This results from glucose either clotting the blood vessels and relating in atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries, or the blood being extremely viscous or saturated due to the high levels of glucose. And there will also be damage to the kidneys because the kidneys must filter more blood per unit time to get rid of the excess glucose to prevent damage to the vessels and nerves. There will be damage to the eyes and damage to the heart. Now, damage to the heart is caused by a reduced blood pressure when extra urine is excreted. So now there is reduced plasma volume in the blood. Therefore, the heart has to pump much harder to maintain mean arterial pressure or normal blood pressure so that the body may function properly. Now I'll talk a bit about type 2 diabetes, in which the person will be insulin resistant or insulin independent. This person does not need insulin supplement into their diet for normal cellular function, whereas in a type 1 diabetic patient, this person is dependent on the supplement of insulin. Now, type 2 diabetes can be caused by genetics or mutation in the cells that secrete insulin in this case. An example they would become hyperfunctional, secreting an excess amount of insulin, and the body will respond to this by reducing the amount of receptors on the cellular membrane. Another point would be metabolic syndrome, which encompasses hypertension or high blood pressure, obesity, high concentrations of triglycerides in the bloodstream, as well as glucose. Obesity can cause type 2 diabetes because complex fats are created in this case, which are not normally seen in the human body. Therefore, there is a reduction in their digestion. These fats are free to flow through the bloodstream and may cause atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. There can also be liver and beta cell malfunction. In a normal, healthy human being, the liver can start and stop the breakdown of glycogen when needed. However, in a type 2 diabetic patient, the liver can start, but in this case, it cannot stop the breakdown of glycogen. Therefore, there is a constant release of glucose into the bloodstream. As a result, there is a constant release of insulin from the pancreas into the bloodstream. Now, in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a similar diagram as drawn in type 1 diabetes. In this case, this would be after a meal in which there is a high glucose concentration in the bloodstream. Therefore, the pancreas will secrete insulin into the bloodstream. In the upper half, it depicts a healthy person in which there is a, let's say, normal amount of receptors on the membrane, or let's say 8 in this case. The bottom half would be a type 2 diabetic person, in which there are a reduced amount of receptors on the cellular membrane, in this case 1. Therefore, only one receptor can recruit one GLUT4 channel to allow glucose absorption into the cell, which means there is a reduced amount of glucose absorption, and the rest of the glucose will travel throughout the bloodstream and excreted in the urine later on. As for acute and chronic consequences of type 2 diabetes, they are the same as type 1 diabetes. Now, in terms of treatment, an easy and cost-effective treatment would be exercise to reduce the amount of overall weight, fats in the body, as well as increasing the health of the heart and blood vessels. Other forms of treatment are pharmaceutical drugs such as thiazolidinediones, which increases insulin sensitivity of the insulin receptors along the cellular membrane. In this case, in the bottom half of the cell, you see that one cell receptor can now respond to insulin at a higher level, allowing greater level amounts of glucose into the cell. There is also metformin, which reduces hepatic glucose release. An example would to decrease the amount of glycogen breakdown by the liver and secretion into the bloodstream. Another effective so-called treatment would to be monitor blood glucose, as this tells you the concentration of glucose in your blood, and therefore you may adjust your diet as needed or with your dietitian. Now on to prevention. Type 2 diabetes can easily be prevented with a balanced diet and exercise. A diet not too high in carbohydrates or sugars and fats. Another key one is to not smoke. Carcinogens in smoke can cause cellular malfunction, in this case, beta cell malfunctions or genetic malfunctions or mutations. So that was an overview of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I hope you liked the video, and thank you so much for watching.